Radical.
Okay, so what I want to talk about right now is Jimmy Kimmel, late night host slash comedian, used to be known for one of the two people on the Man Show in the late 90s. Jimmy Kimmel has been suspended indefinitely and taken off the air. I talked about how South Park, they had a episode mocking Charlie Kirk, and that, to my knowledge, has been suspended from airing in re-airs. But I don't think South Park has been taken off the air. This is different because Jimmy Kimmel has been taken off indefinitely with no idea when he might return. Because during his monologue, he mentioned Charlie Kirk. And he did not criticize Charlie Kirk in the monologue, because you would say, well, if any late night host, whether it be, Colbert, who is, I covered that, who is actually in his last year because of the Skydance merger, basically, essentially a couple days after Colbert was, slated for removal in about a year, that merger went through. So that's the reason that happened. This is a situation to where if anybody said anything about the Charlie Kirk assassination in a late night show, you would say, well, obviously that's in poor taste. It's really bad for something like that to happen, to talk about somebody and criticize them a week or so after they were murdered. That would be terrible. Same situation if actually Donald Trump were killed last year in his shooting. It's just not only in poor taste, I think, actually criticizing somebody after they passed away, but it's completely unnecessary right after. But I don't exactly believe what he says qualifies as a thing where he should be taken off the air. I don't have the exact quote, but he was not criticizing Charlie Kirk or anything he had said or done in the past. He was talking about how the MAGA movement were doing every possible thing they could do to link his murderer, the suspect, to radical leftist, and to make sure it wasn't one of their guys who did it. So that's still on the table. I don't know all the details about that, but I do know this person that is actually the shooter, their history was not as a far left radical. Their family actually was in military, law enforcement. I think they were avid, gun control people. It's not exactly the kind of person that politically conveniently would be called out by either the Trump administration as a radical leftist. Even though in situations like this, I mentioned this in my Charlie Kirk commentary, there's all these people trying to do their best to score political points and not just acknowledging that it's a terrible tragedy when we have someone like Charlie Kirk shot down. Regardless of how you felt about the person, this person they leave a family that is, going through this in mourning. So I just find it disgusting how there's so many people that seem to be rejoicing in the fact that a man was, killed. That's just terrible. And it just speaks a lot to our nature as a society right now. Now, is it in poor taste to even discuss or bring up Charlie Kirk so soon after he was shot and killed? Yeah, it is. I think that would be a moment to where the executives in control could have maybe pulled Kimmel aside and said, hey, you know what? We don't want you doing any more commentary mentioning Charlie Kirk or, anything like that at the moment right now, because it's just too soon after this loss, too soon after the shooting itself. Now, some of you might not agree. Some of you might say free speech, free speech, free speech. And what Kimmel did was not hate speech. It was just in poor taste. Or some people might say too soon after the event. I've seen a lot of people actually that normally would criticize Jimmy Kimmel. Very critical of Jimmy Kimmel, his commentaries, his monologues, don't like the guy. I've seen people coming out saying, well, this is a slippery slope right here. This is a situation to where usually our side, meaning they say the right, are champions of free speech. So right now you have him saying something in poor taste, and even though they acknowledge they don't like the guy, and politically they don't lean the way of a Jimmy Kimmel and everything, because he leans leftist on the show, they acknowledge that this is a very slippery slope we're going down when we try to, what's the word? I guess cancel culture. Maybe it's different, or we try to cancel somebody because they say something. And that's ironic because usually between the left and the right, it's always the right complaining that the left is the cancel culture. But now there's a different dose of it from the right, or specifically from Disney, who owns ABC. Now we see, we see Mickey getting his gloved hands involved in a lot of shit all the time and censoring. One of the main reasons, for instance, Shannon Sharp was cut from ESPN, which is owned by, again, Mickey Mouse. Shannon Sharp was cut from ESPN because of the image and everything. So if you're owned by Disney, you got to make sure not to do anything too graphic, even in your personal life, like Shannon Sharp or Jimmy Kimmel in his statements about Charlie Kirk. Again, the statements were something along the lines of, the MAGA people were trying as hard as they possibly could to make sure to pin the killer of this guy to the leftist and not one of their own people. Whereas I just look at the fact that this is a mentally deranged person. If someone does what this killer did, they are mentally deranged. And everyone's trying to find motives, this and that, and which political side of the party or the spectrum they were aligned to. When the real question is looking into their mental stability. It's mental stability. Too many people focus on that. What they don't need to be focusing on, and it's how he was. But I think people need things to talk about, and I just don't like this part of our culture to where it seems like when something happens, it's always from the left or it's always from the right. It can't just be a deranged, sick individual that would do something like this. Now, some of you will agree and disagree on whether or not Jimmy Kimmel should be suspended indefinitely. There are actually some people out there. One, which is David Letterman, who is, of course, one of the titans of late night from the 90s. Him, Jay Leno, Conan O'Brien. And let me see if I can find his statement. He said, ABC's suspension of Jimmy Kimmel is ridiculous, and you can't go around firing somebody because you're fearful or trying to suck up to different people, essentially. People like Trump and the FCC because, see, they want to get these deals done, but this is a different situation. The reason Colbert was axed mostly was because of the FCC and a merger that was trying to get done. Letterman also said, I feel bad about all this because we see where this is all going, meaning, free speech being threatened. Also, he said it's managed media. There's a management aspect to it. Okay, so there is one person whose opinion you might want to know or maybe don't care about knowing. It's one person who was no fan of Jimmy Kimmel because Jimmy Kimmel, a lot of his monologue was about criticizing the current administration and Trump and making fun of Trump, which there's a lot, of course, to make fun of. No shortage of that. Kimmel said, well, Trump said about Kimmel, congratulations to ABC for finally having the courage to do what had to be done. He said, Kimmel has zero talent and worse ratings than even Colbert, if that's possible. It's a little rusty. I used to do a pretty good Donald Trump impersonation. There was one final thing. There was a couple of interviews where Donald Trump was asked about Charlie Kirk. And of course, he instantly said, it's terrible, that's bad and everything right now. But some people were pointing out how it seems like Donald Trump really doesn't deeply care about the fact that Charlie Kirk was assassinated. Because he instantly segued to talking about You know, we have a gorgeous ballroom that we're making on the White House grounds. So he instantly segmented in those interviews to not talking about Kirk or feeling bad for his family or, reaching out to his family and what. No, it was about something he was doing. And that's something that you would actually classify a trait in someone that's a borderline narcissist. Yeah, and yeah, if it was me in that instance and I was the POTUS and someone was asking me about that, I would just say what I've said before. It's a terrible tragedy, and I feel for the family. I wouldn't put in plugs and start talking about a fucking ballroom that we're putting together unless it's going to be dedicated to Charlie Kirk. Or you have a foundation you're putting together or something like that dedicated to the memory of Charlie Kirk. Now, maybe that could be a case. Maybe it might be, which would be, that would be nice, I would suppose, to have something dedicated to the memory of Charlie Kirk. Even though he didn't have a lot of fans, it's, again, terrible. I will stress terrible that he was killed in the fashion that he was. I just think it's in poor taste for Trump to segue into plugging and talking about something else to that extent, to talk about the ballroom. Because it seems like the ballroom to him is much more important than the passing of somebody that was very, very behind him and his agenda for the most part, except for, I'm sorry this is going a little long, I didn't mean for it to go too long, except for one thing that Kirk was very critical on the Trump administration for, which was not releasing the Epstein files. Not releasing those files, but he maybe switched around a bit and stopped talking about it because he was really angry that the files was not released, as many people were. Then he tried to kind of segue from that, but I think his audience kept pressing him to put pressure on the White House, as many people are, to release the Epstein files, which they are currently in possession of. Now, this is just something I'll throw out there. There's a lot of conspiracy theorists on this. This is one final thing, I promise. Did you know that a couple hours after this shooting, the Congress downvoted something brought up by the Democrats to release the Epstein files? The Republican side actually voted to axe that and to not do that. That was a couple hours after the shooting. So many people actually will have the conspiracy that this might have been what you call a false flag, or he might be a martyr. And actually the administration was behind this shooting. The idea being to distract from the fact that the Epstein files, they voted to block their release. And I don't know how I feel about that conspiracy theory, but there's a lot of people out there that actually feel that there's some merit to that, and other people thinking that it has something to do with Israel because of Kirk's ties to Israel.